There's also this idea of the model context protocol, which is, and there's an example from Yale who seem to be using it, which basically surfaces library stuff in the context when someone's using a large language model. So you might set up a link between ChatGPT, which you know users are using, and your library collections. And that is another mode of integrating library stuff with uh, generative AI. And we might be also doing things like advising on the use or perhaps non-use, things like size space, consensus, those kind of tools. Another example of the way in which library use of AI is kind of maturing is like creating metadata. There's been so many experiments done by the Library of Congress within familiar library systems like Ex Libris platform or OCLC. And national libraries have been working on this for years, in fact. Um, then there's AI chatbots, so not the chatbot that asks you to pick from a selection of choices, but one that has the sort of generative AI sort of eloquence. And I'm sure we're using AI in backend data processing and those kind of applications. And I think this document that's published by Clarivate a few months ago is a really key document because it's saying for two sets of tasks, metadata creation and cataloging, and course reading list and syllabus support, they're saying there's evidence of significant benefits in terms of saving time and efficiency and processing things faster. And their argument is this does not lead to fewer library staff, it leads to a reallocation of staff time. But I think there's still an elephant in the room that if you make things more efficient and faster, what's the impact of on employment? So, but it does seem that library systems are now bringing in AI functionality to help us with our kind of workflows. Another sense in which things are maturing, you probably saw the ALA guidance on the use of artificial intelligence in libraries, which was out for review up until a few days ago. It links to enduring ethical principles, but I think it does really successfully identify the issues for different types of library activity, like collections, public services, technical services. What are the questions we should be asking if we're thinking of implementing AI in any of these processes? And you're probably also aware of the ACRL model of AI competencies for library workers. So that's setting out at least a generalized view of the mindsets, ethical considerations, and knowledge base that we as librarians need, particularly academic librarians, need to deal with AI. So again, it feels like that's maturing our understanding of what we need to know, our literacy about AI, I guess. It's not 100% convincing. There's probably some gaps. It is for academic lives specifically, but I think it's a great document personally. I also want to try and mention for IFLA, we produced something called the entry point to libraries and AI as a kind of annex to the Internet Manifesto. It was published last year. And in that, we say something about the different ways libraries have roles, in licensing resources, in developing public AI, public interest AI or community AI, advising library users on the choice of services, promoting AI literacy, advising the wider organization about AI use, and advocating in general for responsible uses in society. And following that, we've got 14 questions, which I won't go through because there's not really time. 14 questions I think we all should be asking about any possible application of AI. So on the following slides, I just go through those 14 questions. But as I say, I won't go through all those now. And then there's some scenarios to go with that are meant to prompt discussion so we can have a discussion about, okay, how do these questions materialize in our particular context. For example, we're supporting library users to use generative AI responsibly. What are the issues? What are these questions ask us in our particular context? And we've also got a fourth scenario that's out for review right now. But I think you wouldn't be surprised for me to say, like, there are remaining challenges. So I've broken this down to three, and they're interrelated challenges. So the first is changing information behavior, changing ways that people access and use information with large language models. So I think we all know the benefits and problems. It gives an answer to a question rather than a list of resources. It conducts a conversation in natural language, which is a lot easier than trying to think of keywords. It gives you a kind of personalized experience. So I know a friend of mine, she says at the end of ChatGPT has learned to offer her a simplified version of the answer every time because she always asks for that. It's 24/7 available. And I think a dimension of this that we haven't really maybe thought about is like the emotional support that this chatbot offers during what is a stressful thing, searching for information. But as information professionals, we know there are lots of problems. It's inaccurate. It fails to do a key thing as cite its sources, so you can't really check it. It's kind of deceptive in the way it talks to us. It kind of sucks up to us. It agrees with us when it's wrong, even when we're wrong. So it can reinforce our stereotypes, our biases. It's a bit lazy. So if you say do 50 actions, it'll do 30 and then it'll give up. But it won't tell you to give up. It's very plausible as well. It's pretty biased because it's basically trained on material from the global north or from the west. And there's these concerns about the way that we might be offloading key tasks on key learning tasks or key skilled tasks onto AI. Also, the functionality is disappearing into the background, and I give a few examples of this. So this is a study done for ChatGPT as a whole. It's a bit hard to see some of it, but seeking information is a very common thing people are doing with generative AI like ChatGPT. But of course, that's obvious. We know we're using AI when we use ChatGPT. But the most shocking thing I've experienced in the last few years was when Adobe updated their software to read PDFs. It'll pop up and say this when you open a document. This appears to be a long document. It isn't particularly long, by the way. Save time by reading a summary using AI Assistant. That's really a different way of prompting us to use AI, almost like it's endorsing AI. In fact, it's thrusting AI into our faces that we've got to use it. So maybe, for one thing, do we cease to really understand when we are using AI? Just as like the AI overviews in Google search, perhaps people don't really perceive how that relates to AI in the same way that they might feel about Gemini. This is quite old data from over a year ago, and again, it is from the UK, but it shows a growing trust for information-related activities in AI. So well over 50% of people think for answering general knowledge inquiries, it's very good or fairly good. They think it can do complicated mathematics. They can draft emails. It can provide summaries of complex topics. Well, this is kind of true, but at the same time, we would see it as quite problematic, probably. And there are even, right at the bottom of the list, some things that we would be pretty worried about. Diagnosing a medical issue. Over 15% of people think AI is good for that. So there's a level of trust that we might be concerned about. At the same time, there seems to be opening up a kind of digital divide. The same study from a year ago, so it could have changed, but 53% of 18 to 24-year-olds are using AI all the time, but only 2% of people over the retirement age are. So there's some sort of digital divide emerging. And more recently, Wonky did a study of students in the UK. It looked at policy. I will skip over this actually, but it says basically AI is used in lots of different ways, but the policies that we're presenting don't really address that complexity sufficiently, and that actually policy isn't working very well. But also, very worryingly, I think women are far less likely to use AI for assessment, and many carry anxiety about AI disadvantage without using it themselves. There's a significant gender gap in how AI might be used. Disabled students are finding it useful, but they're finding it useful in addressing things that we should already be addressing. And in a way, I think finding 11 is the key one. It's like AI is exposing weaknesses in what we do institutionally. Um, that and it's a lot to do with having many, many students. AI would be less of a problem if we had smaller classes. So it exposes problems we've already got. In the research area, Wiley did a big study of how researchers are using AI. And again, you can see from this that ChatGPT is widely used, but I wouldn't want to use ChatGPT for research. DeepSeek's used a little bit, some of the other large language models, but some of the more reliable things you would think, like Clarivate Service or Scopus AI, Science Direct, or any of these things like SciSpace, there's hardly any actual usage. So people are relying on the general purpose AI tools, even for research, which should be troubling, I would think. And finally, there's a kind of potentially a kind of governance crisis. So this is a study by LexisNexis of workers around quite a few countries. And it's saying people are using generative AI in the workplace, but over 53%, over 50% are using without approval. Even more are paying for the tools themselves. And they say in their organization there's no policy. Well, there might be a policy, but they don't know what it is. And they've received no training. So they call LexisNexis call this a governance crisis. So in summary, how is information behavior changing? And I think the key issue is we don't really know. I haven't seen that many studies, except of students, to say how is information behavior changing. Anecdotally, we know people are using the library resources less. They're asking fewer inquiries. If they are asking inquiries, often they're asking for things that don't really exist because ChatGPT's invented them. They're using AI chatbots as search engines, at least for kind of low stakes searches. They're relying on overviews rather than originating sources, with impacts on those authoritative sources having less traffic and less evidence of their benefit. People are using AI without realizing it, like the example of Adobe. And there's this shadow use of AI, maybe a governance crisis of people are using it in organizations and in ways that we are not really that visible. People want faster, fuller results. And there might be this decline of criticality because of this cognitive offloading where we'll just let AI summarize this rather than read it. And there seem to be new or reinforced inequalities of access to information based on age and gender and other things. So to me, this adds up to quite a significant problem. A second issue, and I think it's very relevant to the subject of this conference, is or the symposium today, the seminar today, is how do we frame the sustainability issue? Because I know a lot of us really care about that. I've seen a lot of professionals say, well, we won't use AI or generative AI because of its environmental impact. But it's such a complex issue that we can't really avoid. But at the same time, how do we get over a kind of somewhat unresolved issue as well. So, I mean, we see a lot of news headlines about AI. Often it's positive, but the a center point of the worries is this question of sustainability. Now, one way to frame this is to use tools like whatusesmore.com, which is basically it compares different activities and even different uh, because AI's impact via data centers changes depending on how that data center is powered. It can deal with that kind of thing. So we can kind of compare like a Google search, a streaming video, driving a car to using AI. And what that does show is that actually the usage impact is quite low. But of course, that's a bit of a problematic message because it's billions of people doing these searches. Here's another example of one of those comparison models. Another way to frame this is, and I think it's very relevant to us as information professionals, is people like Lucioni, who's like a key writer about environmental impact of AI, is saying the use of AI models is increasing, but transparency about its environmental impact is actually falling. And here's the issue. We don't really know what the impact of using AI is on the environment. Companies may not even know themselves, but they're certainly not disclosing it. So it's the secrecy around AI is a problem. So that might be another way of framing the problem. But then we've got to think about, well, it's not just about me searching ChatGPT, it's the whole digital infrastructure that lies behind that, from building devices, shipping devices around the world to e-waste. So we've got to sort of engage in that wider debate. I think a very interesting way of doing that, but this expands the whole question a lot, is through things like Morn's study, where he went back through the supply chain of AI, back to a place in Outer Mongolia where there's environmental devastation caused by our love of these glossy digital technologies. But it's expanding the question much wider beyond AI. So we could see it as about um, the general impact of the digital. But interestingly, people went back to the same study, the same sort of outer Mongolian place more recently and found nothing had changed much. But there's also a sense that why hasn't it changed? There's a geopolitical power struggle going on between China and America. Uh, and that's why some of these things happen. So we've got to see it. It can't just say, well, it's an information problem, it's a geopolitical problem. And then I really like this. This is like a visual representation of all the kind of exploitative, extractive processes that go into generative AI, from building GPUs through to e-waste. But that's very dispiriting because it's kind of talking about structures we can't really control. So another way of looking at it is to look at the movements to resist building data centers. So this is a really nice study that looks at groups in Chile and Santiago in Chile kind of resisting data centers. But at the same time, what they uh, and those groups doing that is kind of quite inspiring what they're doing. But it's part of a much longer, wider struggle about control over water. And it also, I think, to me, prompts a question about why are we talking about human-centric AI when it should be kind of planetary-centric? And then finally, of course, what I haven't mentioned, well, there's a lot of positive potential of AI in general, probably not generative AI as such, but AI in general, of improving science, helping us deal with climate change. So the improved management of complex energy systems, acceleration of technology innovation, trying to understand how to influence people towards better behaviors, dealing with climate, extreme weather, predicting and dealing with climate weather problems. So there's another argument. Is like, oh, AI as a whole is like fantastic for science. There's some quality. There's an article here that I used to cite that position, but it's worth noting that even they acknowledge two preconditions for this to be effective, and one is um, the governments must have a critical role in ensuring responsible AI. Do we trust current governments to do that? Also, it doesn't account for rebound effects, which are basically where we make things more efficient using AI, but that leads to more demand and use. And in the end, the environmental impact is greater. So all I'm saying really is, and we should also link to other societal challenges of generative AI. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's quite hard to frame this debate about the environmental impact of AI because it's so complex. How do we do that within sort of an AI literacy program? And what advice do we give? So here's some suggestions of the type of advice as individuals or as information professionals we should do because of these arguments. So that's, as I see it, the second big challenge that we still have with AI. And the third one is kind of a strategy one. Because I think AI is in a way a unique strategic challenge in the sense of like, as we've already said, these shadow uses, the usage by student has driven the adoption of AI in higher education. It's not that we sort of thought this is a great technology, we'll develop, we'll implement it, we'll train everyone to use it. We haven't got any control. So it's something that's outside our control. AI as a technology is also pretty hard to understand. It's inherently hard to understand because it's based on computation and statistics. And even designers don't really understand the outputs. They can't even control the outputs that well. Of course, on top of that, there's commercial secrecy, which we've kind of already mentioned. AI has so many applications in different areas, it's quite confusing to get a grip of. It's evolving rapidly. So if you look at the history of ChatGPT, it's evolved very, very fast. And we're getting ideas of things like agentic AI coming in. AI has got even more freedom to make decisions and go away and do complex things. AI is increasingly embedded in all systems. So we've already mentioned that. So it's like, how do you even ask people if they're using AI now? And our library system vendors have been quite slow to adopt AI. And then the third thing, why I think it's a unique strategic challenge is for the skills that we tend to have and the values that we tend to have, AI is a particularly direct threat to sort of literacy and writing skills and reading skills. It's all the things we care about. And it's quite hard to have a balanced response to those things. On top of that, this is a slide from a talk where I asked people about, well, what else is happening in the environment that might impact how AI unfolds? So, for example, we know in the UK, certainly, there's quite a sense of financial crisis, cost of living crisis. How does spread of AI interact with that? It's not a very positive context. And in particular, we do have this sense of an information crisis, partly created and partly countered by AI. So we've got a sense of information overload through things like AI slop, just rubbish churned out by AI systems. Again, AI filtering could help us with that. But AI filtering creates filter bubbles, but it could also help in moderating content. The active disinformation from malicious actors through deep fakes, AI could help with fact checking. But there's so many things happening in our environment about creating a sense of information crisis and the reliability. So how does that interact with changes in information behavior? And how do we keep the library brand as a kind of trusted brand in this context, I suppose? So the other thing, I mean, because AI evolves very rapidly, and I know we think a lot of the time about alignment. Libraries need to align to what their institution values and objectives are. But I also argue there's a counter argument for the need for emergent strategies. And this sort of prompts us to sort of build capacity, build capability from the bottom up, rather than just align to what the institution does, because we don't really know how things are going to evolve. And so I put together this kind of idea of different ways of developing that emergent strategy. And I'll quickly go through. So I think there's something about information gathering. And I guess coming to this seminar itself is like information gathering, looking at what's happening in the environment, but also internal information gathering. How are users' behavior? How are researchers? How are our students? How are our other staff using AI? So we need information gathering. We need workforce development tactics. So a lot of ideas have been put forward about how do we upskill existing staff, because we probably can't recruit new staff with AI skills. It's more about how do we engage all staff in learning a little bit more about this technology, such as can we give them individual time to kind of experiment? Can we have an internal conference themed on AI? There's organizational tactics. So it's things like, well, just building a policy seems in itself a really good thing to do as a process, let alone what the output is. Appointing someone to take a leadership role. I know there's lots of working groups in many institutions, but maybe we also need things like communities of practice, looser groups of people just like really keen about AI and exploring it. So there's organizational tactics. We can have relational tactics. This is more along the line of alignment, but it can be aligned with what's happening in the institution, but also external alignment, building other collaborations with other institutions. You can have proof of concept projects. Well, maybe one project where we use AI, say, I mean, a classic one would perhaps be to create metadata about our dissertation database. Would that be quite a good starting point project where a lot of staff could learn about AI more, or maybe an audit of local data resources to discover the quality and ownership issues around that data ahead of planning to use it for AI. So we've got proof of concept projects. And the final one is futuring tactics. I know you've got to talk later on, which is going to go into this in a lot more detail. So I won't say much about it, but I think the idea of future literacy does seem to be growing as an idea. ACRL CNI produced a set of scenarios about AI futures that you can use to discuss within your institution. And the IFLA Trends report also had a lot of work around potential futures with AI, as well as other changes that could happen. So futuring tactics is part of the package. I'm guessing what makes us choose between these different options and how do we decide? Well, I think it's something to do with our professional identity and our skills base. We often see ourselves as educators, we're not developers. It's about the resources demanded of any of these tactics. And it's also kind of user need as well. And then I wanted to sort of, I think, just coming to an end here. I'm not sure about how I'm doing for time, but thinking about, well, what is the future vision for an AI-enabled library? It could be the AI-free library, a trustworthy place where you can go, AI has nothing to do with it. It could be, the living systematic review model. It could be the library as a kind of AI sandbox. We've seen some examples of that, building on the makerspace idea of like it's where people come to collaborate around AI. And this is just a reference to where I've written up a little bit about this stuff. I've talked a lot, but what I'm hoping to do, and I hope I haven't run out of time, is give you a chance to give your views. So if you can read that QR code, or just type into wooclap.com and then put in this code LIR 2026, you should be able to see some questions that we can answer. So let me just escape that and share something else instead. Share. So quite a few people are registering. That's great. 24 people have registered. So I just thought I'd put to you, I think it's a lot more interesting than what I have to say, what you think. So the first question is about uh, which of these AI applications are the most promising? Which are the ones that you're already developing? They're almost like a mature service. Which are you just piloting? Um, and which are you not thinking of developing? So it'd be very interesting to see your kind of votes on these options. So is it all about subscribing to debate? Oh, we've got one answer and it's already, we're not going to do any of these things. I think that is a valid stance. Cataloging with AI support, is that where we think the real value is? Is it performing everyday office tasks? Is it a library AI chatbot? Is it these protocols like RAG and MCP? Is it adopting AI in the library management system? I know it's the theme of this session. I haven't put AI literacy on here because I know most people would see AI through that lens. But I'm just wondering which of the other ways of looking at AI sort of has some support. And then overall, I think we're seeing a few people maybe using it in the library management system. They've got that capability. Maybe an AI chatbot. Cataloging with AI support seems to be one of the stronger supported ideas, or just using AI in everyday office tasks. So again, I would say I decided not to put AI literacy on here because I felt it was a bit too obvious. But perhaps I should have done because I think we'd probably have had an average of 5 or something like that. But it does show we're still quite tentative, perhaps, about how we can use AI. The second question is, what are the challenges then? Where do you think the challenges are? Is it the lack of our skills or our sort of attitudes as a workforce? I'm not sure. So many events have been held around this topic. We're trying to understand and make use of these technologies. Is it just a cost? Is it not a resource-rich institutions often? Is it because we don't have IT development capacity? So in some countries, I think libraries retain this ability to build technologies. And we know there's a lot of open source AI technology that we could use, but that's not what we kind of tend to do. Is it just the speed of change? We can't adapt. Or is it more the privacy risks, the digital divide? Is it the environmental impact? Is it this problem of bias? Um, we're not sure how information behavior is changing. Is it because we've got more important priorities? So again, interesting responses. Interesting that privacy is seen as a key issue. I think there's been so many issues with social media, privacy, surveillance, that we've seen that as an AI problem too. I'm less convinced that that is the main issue. I think it is things like bias that's getting quite a lot of support. It's the inaccuracy, um, the environmental impact we talk quite a lot about, and this issue of like, well, it's deepening the digital divide because people are already falling behind further, plus cost. So we've got a range of sort of responses to those problems. Just to know, a lot of people are voting. What I will do, by the way, is I can put the answers to this into the final version of the slides, and maybe those can be circulated afterwards. And then I want to go back to my idea of these tactics of how we're going to build more capacity. So we're sort of tentative, it seemed, from the first question about how we can use AI. We see a lot of barriers. What are the tactics that we might want to use to build capability around AI? I put in recruiting more expert staff as a bit optimistic. Upskilling existing staff seems more likely. What about appointing a senior member of staff to take this on? Is that something everybody's doing? What about finding out about changing user behavior? Well, I'm glad to see people really think that's important. I think that's so important. How is our user base sort of changing? Studying sector-based practice. So from my earlier slides, there are already a lot of examples out there of things you can do. So we can learn from each other really well. Finding collaborators in the institution or in other institutions. Engaging with the system suppliers to like get them to build the things we need. Running a proof of concept project, do you think that's the way forward? Creating a community of practice. So it seems that the most promising approaches are finding out how user behavior is changing, skilling staff, creating communities of practice, and finding collaborators. We've got a lot of possible directions, and I hope that kind of semi-persuades you that my idea of like an emerging strategy is a valid approach, when a lot of the time we do think in terms of alignment. And then my final question is more of an open-ended one. I think it's a nice way to end, is like, what's your vision of AI for your library? Is it the AI free library? We're not going to touch AI. That's the safest approach. It's got to be an option. Is it AI where it does back end things, saves us loads of time? Is that your vision? Is it all singing, all dancing AI that will allow people really rich access to our collections? Is that AI free library? We've got one supporter for that. Yeah, a few people. AI, use AI as a tool and not a crutch. I think that's a good way of putting it. But it's a crutch that almost kind of thrusts yourself under your arm and forces you to use it, isn't it, in a way? A research support tool based on intentional and strategic use. That's really nice vision, I think. Can't controlling these film. AI advisors, yeah. Zero tolerance for AI. Enhance existing library services. I think that's definitely a way we're going. Is like, well, it's not really changing fundamentally what we're doing. It's just an add-on, an enhancement. AI that does tedious work but does not impact people's critical skills or creativity. Nice one. A chat bot. Help with routine work. Okay, critical, intentional, optional, justified use of open source, ethical LLMs. Developed and hosted locally. That's a wonderful vision. I think that's a very desirable vision. The question is, have we got the resources to develop it locally? AI to analyze stats. So yes, maybe some of the uses that we should be using it for, I haven't mentioned. I haven't mentioned like using AI to sort of analyze it, and predict how the library is going to be used. Text analysis of digitized archival sources, create data sets. So that's where, yeah, there is a big, strong community, the AI for LAM community of national libraries, special libraries that are doing lots of really great things with in digital humanities, the kind of projects with AI. Integrating the best of AI in lots of areas, streamlining processes, improving student research experience. So it's like, oh yes, I think that's comment is in line with, augmenting existing library services, supporting workflows but not dominating a library. Library's trusted partner to help guide students and researchers to use critically and ethically. Time-saving, efficient, but transparent. Yeah, transparency is so important, isn't it? For us, we need to be saying when we are using it up front and be clear about how it works and when it's being used, particularly, yeah. Help with stock taking other routine tasks. Well, we've got so many answers here. It's fantastic. I probably haven't got time to read them all. I'm aware I've probably overshot my time anyway. So perhaps I'll stop sharing that. But what I promised to do is add all your answers into the back of the slides, and I guess we will circulate the final version of the slides with your answers in. So thank you so much for your attention. That's my presentation. I have no idea whether I'm on time or finished 2 hours after, but thank you for your attention and your participation, of course.